The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. My father? He's nothing but a washed-up loser who couldn't even keep his own business running. I stood frozen behind the half-open door of my son's apartment, groceries in hand, listening to him tear apart everything I'd sacrificed for him. But what happened next would teach him a lesson he'd never forget. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Standing there in that narrow hallway, I felt my world collapse. Marcus, my only son, the boy I'd worked 3 jobs to put through medical school, was describing me to his friends like I was some kind of embarrassment. The grocery bags trembled in my weathered hands as his voice carried through the thin apartment door. Honestly, guys, it's pathetic. He shows up here every week with groceries like I'm some charity case. The man lost his construction company, burned through his savings, and now he's working as a night janitor at the community college. At 62 years old, can you imagine anything more humiliating? Laughter erupted from inside the apartment, male voices, probably his medical school buddies, joining in the cruel chorus. My throat constricted as I recognized the sound of my own son participating in my public humiliation. But Marcus, a voice I didn't recognize, chimed in, "Doesn't he help you out financially? I thought you mentioned something about your dad covering your textbook costs last semester." Look, Trevor, that's just guilt money. He knows he screwed up my childhood by always working, never being around for important stuff. The least he can do is contribute something meaningful to my future. Besides, Victoria thinks I should cut him off completely. She says successful people don't associate with failures, even family failures. Victoria. The name made my stomach turn. Marcus had been dating her for 8 months, and from our first meeting, I knew she was poison. Beautiful, ambitious, and colder than January ice. She came from money, real money, and she never let anyone forget it. Her father owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across the state, and she wore her privilege like armor. Victoria's probably right, another voice agreed. My dad always says you become who you associate with. If Marcus is going to be a successful surgeon, he needs to surround himself with successful people. I pressed my back against the hallway wall, my heart hammering against my ribs. 26 years of single fatherhood, of choosing between eating dinner or buying Marcus new school clothes, of working double shifts so he could attend the best schools, reduced to this moment of casual cruelty. The memories flooded back unbidden. Marcus at 7, crying because kids at school made fun of his worn sneakers. I worked 16-hour days for 2 weeks straight to buy him those expensive name-brand shoes he desperately wanted. Marcus at 16, begging to go on the senior class trip to Europe. I sold my only valuable possession, my father's vintage watch, to make that dream come true. Marcus at 18, accepted to medical school but drowning in application fees and preparation costs. I mortgaged our house to cover everything, telling him it was an investment in both our futures. He hugged me that day, tears in his eyes, promising he'd make me proud. Standing in that hallway, listening to him mock my failures, I wondered when those promises had turned to ash. Seriously, though, Marcus continued, his voice taking on a more serious tone, Victoria and I have been talking about our future together. We want to move to the upscale district after I graduate, maybe start our own practice. Having my dad hanging around, looking like he stepped out of a homeless shelter, isn't exactly the image we're going for. So what's your plan? Trevor asked. Honestly, I'm hoping he'll just fade away naturally. Maybe find some woman his own age to take care of him. Victoria's father has connections with several retirement communities. Places where people like my dad can live out their remaining years without embarrassing their families. The grocery bags slipped from my numb fingers, cans rolling across the hallway floor with metallic echoes that seemed impossibly loud. I scrambled to collect them, my hands shaking with humiliation and rage. A lifetime of sacrifice, dismissed as embarrassment. A father's love, reframed as inconvenience. I'd been bringing groceries to Marcus every Tuesday for 3 years, ever since he started medical school. Not because he asked, but because I remembered being a broke student myself, living on ramen noodles and hope. I wanted to make sure he ate real food, vegetables, and fresh meat, the nutrition he needed to succeed. Now I understood the truth. Those weekly visits weren't appreciative gestures of parental support. They were reminders of everything he wanted to leave behind. The apartment door suddenly swung open and Marcus appeared, probably checking the hallway noise. His face went through a series of expressions when he saw me crouched among scattered groceries. Surprise, embarrassment, then something that looked almost like defiance. "Dad, what are you doing here?" I stood slowly, my knees protesting after years of physical labor. "Bringing your groceries, like every Tuesday for the past 3 years." Behind him, I could see his friends gathered around a glass coffee table, textbooks and energy drinks scattered across its surface. They were all watching now, probably wondering if they'd just witnessed family drama worthy of daytime television. Marcus stepped into the hallway, pulling the door partially closed behind him. "Dad, you can't just show up unannounced like this. I've told you before, call first. Since when do I need permission to bring food to my son?" His jaw tightened, and I saw Victoria's influence written across his features. The way he held his shoulders, the slight sneer that hadn't existed before he met her. "Look, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I'm an adult now. I can handle my own grocery shopping." "With what money?" The question came out harsher than I intended. "Last time I checked, medical students don't exactly swim in cash." "That's not your concern anymore." He glanced back toward his apartment, where his friends were undoubtedly listening to every word. "I'm building a life here, Dad, a professional life, and I need space to do that without constantly worrying about what? About your embarrassing failure of a father?" The words hung between us like smoke. Marcus's face flushed, confirming that he knew I'd heard everything. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the boy he used to be, the one who'd run to me with scraped knees and broken toys. Then, Victoria's training reasserted itself. "You heard what I said in there. Every word." He straightened his spine, meeting my eyes with cold resolve. "Then you know how I feel. I'm sorry if that hurts, but I can't keep pretending everything's fine when it's not. You lost the business, Dad. You lost the house. You're working a job that teenagers do for spending money. That's not the kind of stability I want associated with my future." The grocery bags felt impossibly heavy in my hands. "And Victoria agrees with this assessment?" "Victoria understands success. Her family built something lasting, something impressive. They didn't let sentiment and poor business decisions destroy everything they worked for." I nodded slowly, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. "I see. And where exactly does that leave us?" Marcus shifted uncomfortably, glancing again toward his apartment door. "I think we both need some time to figure that out. Maybe it's better if you don't come around for a while. Let me focus on finishing school, on building the life I want." "The life Victoria wants, you mean?" "The life we want together." His voice carried a finality that cut deeper than any of his earlier insults. "I'm not a kid anymore, Dad. I make my own decisions." I set the grocery bags down in the hallway, straightening with a dignity I didn't feel. "You're absolutely right, Marcus. You're not a kid anymore. Kids believe in things like loyalty and gratitude. Adults know better." Without another word, I turned and walked toward the stairwell. Behind me, I heard him call my name once, but I didn't stop. The echo of my footsteps in the concrete stairwell sounded like a funeral march. Driving home through the city streets, I tried to process what had just happened. 26 years of single parenthood, of choosing my son's needs over my own wants, had led to this moment of complete rejection. The boy I'd raised, the man I'd sacrificed everything to educate, had just dismissed me like unwanted baggage. My small apartment felt even smaller when I finally walked through the door. After losing the house 2 years ago, I downsized to this cramped one-bedroom place in a neighborhood that had seen better decades. The walls were thin, the carpet was worn, and the kitchen barely had room for one person. But it was clean, and it was mine, and most importantly, it was affordable on a janitor's salary. I sat in my second-hand recliner, staring at the blank television screen, replaying Marcus's words. My father? He's nothing but a washed-up loser. The casual cruelty of it stung worse than any physical blow I'd ever taken. The construction business had been my pride and joy for 15 years. Hammond Construction, named after my father, who taught me everything about building and craftsmanship. We'd built homes for young families, renovated historic buildings, contributed something meaningful to our community. The company wasn't huge, but it was solid, reputable, and it provided good jobs for 12 employees who became like family. Then the recession hit like a wrecking ball. Construction projects dried up overnight. Clients who'd promised payment suddenly couldn't pay. Supply costs skyrocketed while demand plummeted. I mortgaged everything, burned through savings, even cashed out my retirement fund trying to keep the business alive and my employees working. For 2 years, I fought a losing battle against economic forces I couldn't control. Every morning, I'd wake up hoping for the call that would save us, the big contract that would turn everything around. Instead, I watched my life's work crumble piece by piece. The final blow came when my biggest client, a real estate development company, declared bankruptcy and left me holding $180,000 in unpaid invoices. There was no recovery from that kind of loss. Hammond Construction died, taking my house, my savings, and apparently my son's respect with it. But through all of it, through the humiliation of bankruptcy court and the shame of losing everything I'd built, Marcus had been supportive. Or so I thought. He'd called regularly during those dark months, assuring me that material things didn't matter, that our relationship was more important than money. Now I understood the truth. He'd been counting the days until he could distance himself from my failure. Victoria had simply given him permission to abandon the pretense of caring. The next few weeks passed in a gray blur of routine. Work, sleep, eat, repeat. I cleaned the community college's hallways and classrooms while students young enough to be my children walked past without seeing me. Invisible labor performed by an invisible man. Marcus didn't call. Part of me had hoped he might reconsider his harsh words, maybe reach out with an apology or at least an explanation. Instead, silence stretched between us like an ocean. I considered calling him several times, even drove past his apartment complex twice, but pride stopped me from making the first move. If my son wanted me out of his life, I wouldn't beg for readmission. 3 weeks after our confrontation, I was mopping the floors in the medical building when I overheard a conversation that changed everything. 2 students were discussing someone's relationship drama, and one of them mentioned Marcus's name. "Did you hear about Marcus Hammond? His girlfriend Victoria dumped him last week. Apparently she'd been cheating on him with some cardiology resident for months." I stopped mopping, pretending to focus on a particularly stubborn stain while I listened. No way! They seemed so solid. Wasn't she always talking about their future together? That's what makes it so brutal. She'd been planning her exit strategy for months, apparently. The cardiology guy comes from even more money than her family. His father owns a chain of private hospitals across 3 states. Victoria decided she could do better than a medical student whose dad lost everything in business. Ouch, that's cold even by Victoria's standards. Marcus is completely devastated. Someone said he's been missing classes, not sleeping, basically falling apart. The worst part is, she told everyone she was leaving him because she couldn't be associated with his loser family background. Those were her exact words, according to Sarah. The mop handle slipped from my hands, clattering against the tile floor. Victoria had destroyed my son using the very words he'd used to describe me. The irony was so perfect it almost seemed orchestrated by some cosmic sense of justice. But as the initial satisfaction faded, I felt something unexpected. Not vindication or righteous anger, but genuine concern for Marcus. Despite everything he'd said, despite the cruel rejection and public humiliation, he was still my son. The boy I'd raised alone, the man I'd sacrificed everything to educate. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wrestling with conflicting emotions. part of me wanted to let Marcus suffer the consequences of his choices. He'd chosen Victoria over family loyalty, ambition over gratitude. Now he was learning that people who value you only for your status will abandon you the moment that status becomes a liability. But the father in me, the part that had stayed awake countless nights when he was sick as a child, couldn't ignore his pain. Victoria's betrayal would hurt him deeply, not just romantically but professionally. Medical school was stressful enough without the added trauma of public humiliation and heartbreak. I found myself thinking about all the times I'd comforted him through disappointments, failed tests, broken friendships, teenage heartbreak. I'd always been there, offering support and perspective, helping him learn from mistakes without drowning in them. Now he was facing the biggest disappointment of his young life, and he was facing it alone. The next morning, I made a decision that probably proved I was exactly the fool Marcus thought I was. I drove to his apartment complex, parking across the street where I could observe without being seen. For 2 hours, I watched his building, hoping to catch a glimpse of him, to assess his condition without forcing an uncomfortable confrontation. Finally, he emerged from the entrance, and my heart clenched at the sight. My son, usually so carefully groomed and confident, looked like he'd been through a war. His hair was uncombed, his clothes wrinkled, his face gaunt with obvious weight loss. He moved like someone carrying invisible weights, shoulders slumped in defeat. This wasn't the arrogant young man who dismissed me as an embarrassment. This was a broken boy who needed his father, even if he was too proud to admit it. I waited until he'd driven away, probably heading to class or the hospital for his clinical rotations, then walked to his apartment building. The elderly superintendent, Mrs. Chen, recognized me from my years of grocery deliveries. "Mr. Hammond, I haven't seen you in weeks. Is everything all right with Marcus? He seemed so troubled lately." "He's going through a difficult time," I told her, which was certainly true. "I was wondering if you might let me into his apartment. I'd like to leave him some groceries and maybe tidy up a bit, help him through this rough patch." Mrs. Chen hesitated, clearly uncertain about the ethics of letting me into someone else's apartment, even if I was the tenant's father. "He gave me permission," I lied smoothly. "We talked about it yesterday. He's been too busy with school to maintain the place properly." The kindness in her eyes told me she wanted to believe the lie. "Well, I suppose it would be all right. You've always been such a devoted father. Marcus is lucky to have you." If only she knew how her tenant really felt about his devoted father. The apartment was worse than I'd expected. Dirty dishes piled in the sink, empty takeout containers scattered across the coffee table, textbooks and papers in chaotic heaps. It looked like someone had been living in crisis mode for weeks. I spent the next 3 hours cleaning, washing dishes, taking out garbage, organizing his study materials, restocking his refrigerator with fresh food. I changed his bed sheets, scrubbed his bathroom, and left a pot of my homemade chili simmering on the stove. In his bedroom, I found evidence of Victoria's complete erasure from his life. Picture frames that had once held photos of them together now sat empty on his dresser. A small pile of gifts she'd given him, jewelry and expensive accessories, lay in a box marked donation by the door. On his nightstand, I discovered something that stopped me cold. A framed photograph from Marcus's medical school graduation ceremony 8 months ago. In the picture, he stood between Victoria and me, all 3 of us smiling at the camera. But someone had carefully cut Victoria out of the photo, leaving just father and son sharing that moment of pride and accomplishment. He'd kept me in the picture while erasing her completely. Maybe I'd misunderstood the depth of his feelings. Maybe Victoria's influence had been stronger than his genuine beliefs. Maybe there was still hope for salvaging our relationship. I was putting finishing touches on the kitchen when I heard his key in the lock. Panic flooded my system as I realized I'd been caught breaking into his apartment. The door opened, and Marcus stepped inside, stopping short when he saw me standing by his stove. "Dad, what are you doing here? How did you get in?" "Mrs. Chen let me in," I admitted, deciding honesty was the only option. "I came to check on you." His face cycled through emotions I couldn't quite read. Surprise, anger, confusion, and something that might have been relief. You can't just break into my apartment because you're worried about me. You're right, I shouldn't have done that. I turned off the stove and gathered my cleaning supplies. But I heard about Victoria, and I knew you were hurting. Marcus's composure cracked slightly at the mention of her name. Who told you about Victoria? It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're going through something difficult, and despite everything that's happened between us, you're still my son. He looked around the apartment, taking in the clean surfaces, the organized study materials, the fresh groceries visible through the open refrigerator door. You cleaned everything. I thought it might help. Sometimes when life feels chaotic, having an organized environment can provide a little peace. Marcus sat down heavily in one of his kitchen chairs, and for the first time in months, he looked like the boy I'd raised rather than the ambitious stranger he'd become. She left me for someone else, someone whose family has more money, more status, more everything. I joined him at the small table, choosing my words carefully. I'm sorry she hurt you. Betrayal from someone you trust is always devastating. The worst part is how stupid I feel. Looking back, I can see all the signs I ignored. The way she'd check her phone constantly when we were together, how she'd make excuses to avoid spending time with my friends, the casual cruelty when she talked about people she considered beneath her. My heart ached for him, but I didn't interrupt. Sometimes people need to voice their pain before they can process it. She told people she was leaving me because of my family background. Said she couldn't build a successful life with someone whose father was a failure. Marcus looked up at me, his eyes red with exhaustion and shame. She used the same words I used about you. There it was, the acknowledgement of what had really happened between us. Victoria hadn't created Marcus's cruel assessment of my failures. She'd simply given him permission to voice thoughts he'd been harboring privately. I heard what you said about me that day, I told him quietly. In your apartment, to your friends. Marcus's face flushed with shame. Dad, I'm so sorry. I was trying to impress people who weren't worth impressing. I was parroting things Victoria had been saying, trying to sound sophisticated and ambitious. Were they your thoughts or hers? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. Both, I think. I was angry about losing the house, about having to watch you work a job that felt beneath everything you'd accomplished. I was embarrassed, and instead of dealing with those feelings maturely, I let Victoria convince me that shame was the same thing as wisdom. I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. Losing the business was the hardest thing I've ever experienced, not because of the money or the house, but because it meant I couldn't provide for you the way I'd always planned. I felt like I'd failed as a father. You didn't fail, Marcus said quickly. You sacrificed everything for my education. You worked 3 jobs so I could focus on studying. You never made me feel guilty about the costs or the pressure it put on you. Then why did my failures embarrass you so much? Marcus pulled his hand away, running it through his unwashed hair. Because Victoria made me see everything through her eyes. She'd talk about her friends whose parents were successful doctors and lawyers and businessmen. She'd make little comments about how different our backgrounds were, how much work it would take to elevate my social standing. And you believed her? I wanted to believe I could become someone worthy of her respect, someone whose family background would impress rather than embarrass. I convinced myself that distancing myself from your struggles would somehow erase them from my history. The honesty in his voice was painful, but necessary. And now? Now I understand what you've been trying to teach me my whole life. That character matters more than status. That loyalty means something. That the people who love you when you have nothing are the ones worth keeping when you have everything. I felt tears threatening, but I held them back. This conversation was too important for emotional displays. Victoria showed you who she really was when she left. She valued your potential more than your person. Just like I valued your success more than your sacrifice. Marcus met my eyes directly. I'm ashamed of what I said, Dad, and I'm ashamed of how I treated you. You deserved better from the son you raised. The apology hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure how to cross. Part of me wanted to forgive immediately, to pretend the hurt had never happened, but part of me needed to understand what had really changed. What happens now? I asked. When you're back on your feet, when you meet someone new, when life gets comfortable again, will you remember this conversation, or will you remember why you wanted distance in the first place? Marcus considered the question seriously. I learned something important from Victoria's betrayal. When you judge people by their circumstances rather than their character, you become someone who can be judged the same way. She discarded me the moment she found someone with better circumstances. And that taught you what, exactly? That the people who stick with you through difficulties are the ones worth building a life with. You came here today, after everything I said, after the way I treated you. You cleaned my apartment and cooked my food and worried about my well-being even though I didn't deserve it. I stood up from the table, suddenly needing some distance to process the emotional weight of his words. I came because you're my son. That doesn't change based on circumstances or arguments or even cruel words. But Marcus, I need you to understand something important. He waited, watching me with the attention he used to give my bedtime stories when he was small. I can forgive what happened between us. I can understand that Victoria's influence was strong and that you were trying to build a life you thought she'd respect. But I can't go back to being someone you're ashamed of. I won't pretend my current circumstances don't exist, and I won't apologize for the choices I made to support your education. I'm not asking you to change anything about your life, Marcus said firmly. I'm asking you to let me change something about mine. Which is what? Let me remember who I am, who you taught me to be. Someone who values sacrifice over status. Someone who understands that dignity comes from how you treat people, not from what you own. I looked around his small apartment, so similar to my own humble space, and realized something profound had shifted. The boy who'd been embarrassed by his father's reduced circumstances was gone. In his place was a man who understood that circumstances change, but character endures. There's something else, Marcus continued. Something I need to tell you about Victoria's family. I waited, sensing this was important. Her father, the one she was so proud of, the one whose success she used to measure everyone else, he's being investigated for tax evasion and fraud. Apparently, he's been inflating car values and hiding income for years. The FBI raided his dealerships last week. The irony was almost too perfect. And Victoria knows this? She found out the same day she broke up with me. Turned out her new boyfriend, the cardiology resident, comes from family money that's completely legitimate. She jumped ship before her father's scandal could damage her reputation. I sat back down, processing this information.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
So, she abandoned you to avoid being associated with legal troubles, while being investigated for the exact kind of criminal behavior she always claimed to despise. Marcus laughed bitterly. The whole time she was criticizing you for losing your business honestly, her father was building wealth through fraud. The satisfaction I felt was immediate and overwhelming. Victoria, who'd measured everyone by their financial success, had discovered that her own family's wealth was built on lies. The woman who'd convinced my son to abandon his father for having reduced circumstances was now facing circumstances far worse than anything I'd experienced. There's a certain justice in that, I admitted. More than you know, Marcus said. Her father's legal troubles are going to be very public. Local news has already picked up the story. All those social connections she was so proud of, they're distancing themselves as fast as possible. And the cardiology resident? Broke up with her yesterday when the news broke. Apparently, he can't be associated with that kind of scandal either. I felt a twinge of something that might have been sympathy for Victoria, followed immediately by the memory of her cutting words about my failures. Sometimes the universe provides its own education about humility. "I'm not happy she's suffering," Marcus continued, reading my expression. "But I'm grateful I learned the truth about her character before I made any permanent commitments." "What kind of permanent commitments?" Marcus walked to his bedroom and returned with a small velvet box. "I was planning to propose next month. Had it all worked out with her father, the restaurant reservations, the whole elaborate plan. The engagement ring inside was beautiful and expensive, probably worth several months of my current salary. You can return it." "Already did. Turns out the jeweler has a very generous return policy for broken engagements." Marcus closed the box with a snap. "The money is going towards something more important." "Which is?" "I want to help you start over, Dad. Not charity, not guilt money, but a real partnership. I've been thinking about it all week, and I have an idea." I was immediately suspicious. The last thing I wanted was pity disguised as business opportunity. "Marcus, I appreciate the thought, but I'm not looking for handouts." "It's not a handout, it's a business proposal." He pulled out a folder I hadn't noticed before, filled with papers and printed articles. "I've been researching medical facility construction, specifically outpatient surgery centers and specialty clinics." He spread the papers across his clean kitchen table, and I could see he'd put serious thought into whatever he was proposing. "There's huge demand for specialized medical facilities, but most construction companies don't understand the unique requirements. Clean rooms, specialized ventilation, equipment mounting systems, compliance with medical building codes." I examined the documents, recognizing the thoroughness that had made him a successful student. "This isn't exactly residential construction." "No, but it's still construction. And you still understand building better than anyone I know. What you'd need is someone who understands the medical side, someone who could bridge the gap between what doctors need and what builders can provide." The idea was intriguing despite my skepticism. "You're talking about a significant investment, specialized equipment, certification programs, insurance requirements." "I'm talking about combining your construction expertise with my medical knowledge to create something neither of us could build alone." Marcus leaned forward, his enthusiasm genuine and infectious. "The ring money would cover initial certification costs and basic equipment. My graduation is in 6 months, and I'll have connections throughout the medical community." "Medical school doesn't exactly leave you free time for running a construction business." "No, but residency includes rotations through different departments, different facilities. I'd be learning the practical side of medical operations while building relationships with administrators and doctors who make facility decisions." I found myself considering the proposal seriously. It would mean starting over again at an age when most people were planning retirement. But it would also mean working with my son, rebuilding not just a business, but our relationship. "What would you call this hypothetical company?" Marcus smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. "Hammond Medical Construction. Father and son building the future of healthcare." The name hit me harder than I'd expected. After losing everything, after years of feeling like a failure, the idea of building something meaningful again was almost overwhelming. "You've really thought this through." "I've had a lot of time to think lately. About what matters, about what I want to build with my life, about the kind of man I want to be." Marcus gathered the papers into neat stacks. "I want to be someone who builds things up instead of tearing them down. Someone who values family over status. Someone who would make you proud." "Marcus, you've always made me proud. Even when you hurt my feelings, even when you said things that stung, I was proud of your intelligence and your ambition and your potential. But now, I want you to be proud of my character, too." I looked around his apartment, at the evidence of my care and his gratitude, at the business proposal that represented hope for both our futures. "I'm already proud of your character. It just took some difficult circumstances to reveal it." "So, you'll consider the partnership?" I'll consider it, I promised. But first, you need to finish medical school. Focus on your studies, on rebuilding your confidence, on figuring out what kind of doctor you want to be. The business will wait. And us? Will we wait too? I stood up from the table, gathering my cleaning supplies and car keys. Marcus, you're my son. That relationship doesn't depend on business partnerships or apologies or even shared ambitions. It depends on love, and love doesn't require waiting. As I headed for the door, Marcus called my name. Dad, would you like to come for dinner Sunday? I'll cook this time. I've been thinking about trying Mom's old recipe for pot roast. The mention of his mother, who died when he was 12, caught me off guard. You remember that recipe? I remember you making it every year on her birthday. I remember you teaching me to cook it when I was 16, saying I'd need to know how to make the things that mattered. I'd love to come for dinner Sunday. Walking back to my car, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not just for financial recovery or business success, but for the relationship that mattered most. My son had found his way back to the values I'd tried to teach him, and he'd done it by learning the hard way what happens when you abandon those values. Victoria's betrayal had been devastating for Marcus, but it had also been educational. He'd learned that people who value you only for your circumstances will abandon you when those circumstances change. He'd learned that status without character is worthless. Most importantly, he'd learned that the people who love you unconditionally are the ones worth fighting to keep. As I drove home through the city streets, I thought about the business proposal and what it might mean for both our futures. Building medical facilities would be challenging, requiring new skills and significant investment, but it would also be meaningful work, creating spaces where healing happened, where lives were saved. More than that, it would be something we built together, a legacy that honored both my construction experience and his medical knowledge. A partnership based on mutual respect rather than obligation or guilt. Sunday dinner was a revelation. Marcus had indeed learned to make his mother's pot roast, and he'd set the table with care that reminded me of family dinners from his childhood. We talked about everything except the painful words that had driven us apart. Instead, we discussed his upcoming final exams, my work at the college, memories of his mother that we both treasured. It felt like coming home to a relationship I'd thought was lost forever. 3 months later, Marcus graduated medical school with honors. I sat in the audience, wearing my best suit and a pride that threatened to overwhelm me. When his name was called, when he walked across that stage to receive his diploma, I thought about all the sacrifices that had led to this moment. The lost business, the financial struggles, the humble apartment and night janitor job. All of it had been worth this. My son had achieved his dream, and despite the painful detour of the past year, he'd achieved it while remembering the values that truly mattered. After the ceremony, Marcus found me in the crowd of families and friends. But instead of the awkward distance that had characterized our recent interactions, he hugged me with genuine affection. "Thank you," he whispered in my ear, "for everything. For the sacrifices you made, for the lessons you taught me, and for forgiving me when I forgot who I was." "You never forgot," I told him. "You just took a temporary detour. The important thing is you found your way back." That evening, over dinner at a restaurant Marcus insisted on paying for, we made our business partnership official. Hammond Medical Construction would launch after his residency, giving him time to build medical connections while I researched the specialized requirements of healthcare facility construction. It wasn't the future I'd imagined when I started Hammond Construction 20 years earlier, but it was a future built on family, on mutual respect, and on the understanding that true success comes from building something meaningful with people you love. Marcus had learned the hard way that status without character is worthless. I'd learned that sometimes the greatest failures can become the foundation for even greater successes. And together, we'd learned that family isn't about perfect circumstances or flawless decisions. It's about love that endures through difficulties, forgiveness that heals old wounds, and the courage to build something better together. 6 months later, I received a card in the mail with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping about Victoria's father's sentencing for tax fraud and embezzlement. He'd received 18 months in federal prison and had been ordered to pay over $2 million in fines and restitution. Below the clipping, someone had written in familiar handwriting, "Thought you'd want to know. Karma is real. A friend." I never found out who sent that newspaper clipping, though I suspected it might have been Trevor, one of Marcus's former friends who'd witnessed our confrontation in the hallway months earlier. Word travels fast in medical school circles, and the story of Victoria's spectacular downfall had apparently become cautionary legend among the student body. Marcus was in his second month of residency at Metropolitan General Hospital when the news about Victoria's father broke publicly. The timing couldn't have been more perfect for demonstrating the contrast between authentic success and fraudulent prosperity. While Mr. Vanderbilt was being escorted to federal prison in handcuffs, my son was saving lives and building a reputation for excellence that no amount of money could buy. The transformation in Marcus during those early months of residency was remarkable to witness. The insecure young man who'd sought validation through Victoria's approval had evolved into a confident doctor who earned respect through competence and character. His supervising physicians praised his diagnostic skills, his bedside manner, and his ability to remain calm under pressure. More importantly, he'd maintained the humility that his painful experience with Victoria had taught him. Where other residents might have developed arrogance as their skills improved, Marcus remained grounded in the understanding that circumstances could change rapidly and that treating people with dignity mattered more than displaying superiority. Our Sunday dinners had become a cherished tradition, a weekly opportunity to maintain our rebuilt relationship while discussing the challenges and triumphs of our respective work lives. Marcus would share stories from the hospital, the difficult cases that tested his knowledge, the moments of breakthrough when treatment succeeded, the heartbreak of losing patients despite everyone's best efforts. In return, I'd tell him about my experiences at the community college, the students I encountered during my night shifts, the small ways I tried to make their educational environment more welcoming. What had started as a temporary job born of financial necessity had evolved into something unexpectedly meaningful. Working at the college had given me perspective on education that I'd never possessed during my construction years. I watched young people struggle with finances, family expectations, and uncertain futures. Many of them worked multiple jobs while pursuing degrees, sacrificing sleep and social lives in pursuit of better opportunities. Their determination reminded me of Marcus during his undergraduate years, when he'd balanced studying with part-time work to help cover expenses I couldn't afford. I'd been so focused on my own shame about our reduced circumstances that I'd failed to appreciate the strength of character those struggles had developed in my son. During one particularly memorable Sunday dinner, Marcus shared a story that crystallized how much his perspective had changed since Victoria's departure. "There's a patient in the cardiac unit," he began, carefully cutting his roast beef. "An older gentleman named Frank who worked construction his whole life. Had a massive heart attack last week, and his prognosis is uncertain." I set down my fork, sensing there was more to this story than medical details. Frank's been worried sick about his medical bills. He doesn't have great insurance, and he keeps apologizing to the nurses for taking up space that could go to someone who can afford better care. Yesterday, I sat with him for an hour after my shift ended, just talking. What did you talk about? His work, mostly. Frank spent 40 years building houses, schools, community centers. He showed me pictures on his phone of projects he'd completed, and his face just lit up when he described the craftsmanship involved, the pride he took in creating something solid and lasting. Marcus paused, meeting my eyes across the dinner table. 6 months ago, I would have seen Frank as someone whose circumstances were unfortunate, maybe even embarrassing. Now, I see him as someone who spent his life building the infrastructure that makes everyone else's success possible. The comparison wasn't subtle, and it wasn't meant to be. Marcus was telling me that he'd learned to value contribution over compensation, substance over status. What's Frank's prognosis? Better than we initially hoped. The damage was significant, if he's responding well to treatment. He'll need lifestyle changes and ongoing medication, but he should recover enough to enjoy retirement with his grandchildren. That's wonderful news. The best part is watching how the nursing staff responds to him. Frank treats everyone with such genuine respect and gratitude that he's become a favorite patient. The nurses go out of their way to check on him, not because they're required to, but because his appreciation makes their difficult job feel worthwhile. I understood what Marcus was really saying. He'd observed the difference between demanding respect based on status and earning respect through character. Frank's gratitude and humility had made him beloved among the hospital staff, while entitled patients with superior insurance were often treated with professional courtesy but little genuine warmth. "There's something else about Frank's story," Marcus continued.
His son visits every day after work, still wearing his construction clothes, clearly exhausted from physical labor. But he never misses a day, never seems to resent the time or expense involved. That's what sons do when they understand what their fathers have sacrificed. Exactly. Watching them together made me think about all the times you visited me in the hospital when I was young. You'd show up straight from construction sites, covered in dust and paint, worried sick about whatever minor injury or illness had landed me there. I remembered those visits vividly. Broken arms from bicycle accidents, appendicitis at age 14, pneumonia during his senior year of high school. I dropped everything each time, racing to the hospital with my heart pounding, terrified that something serious might be wrong. I never cared how you looked or what people might think about my blue-collar father showing up in work clothes, Marcus said. I only cared that you were there, that you dropped everything because I needed you. You were my priority. Everything else could wait. But somewhere along the way, I started seeing your work clothes as embarrassment instead of evidence of your dedication. Victoria convinced me that image mattered more than substance, that successful people were ashamed of family members who didn't look the part. Marcus pushed his vegetables around his plate, clearly still processing the depth of his previous misunderstanding. Now I see Frank's son rushing to the hospital every evening, and I remember what real family loyalty looks like. It's not about maintaining appearances or protecting your social status. It's about showing up when someone needs you, regardless of what anyone else might think. The conversation stayed with me long after dinner ended. Marcus had learned through observation and experience what I'd failed to teach him directly through all those years of sacrifice and support. Sometimes the most important lessons can only be internalized through personal discovery rather than parental instruction. 3 weeks later, Marcus called me with excitement I hadn't heard in his voice since his medical school acceptance letter arrived years earlier. "Dad, you need to get down to the hospital as soon as possible. There's someone I want you to meet." "Is everything all right? You sound strange." "Everything's better than all right. Can you come now? I'm in the cardiac unit." The urgency in his voice convinced me to leave work early, something I rarely did given my sense of responsibility to my employer. During the drive to Metropolitan General, I tried to imagine what could have Marcus so excited that he needed me to meet someone immediately. I found him at the nurse's station, practically vibrating with energy as he completed paperwork. When he saw me approaching, his face broke into the kind of grin I remembered from his childhood, when he'd accomplished something particularly impressive. "Perfect timing. Frank's awake and feeling much better today. I told him about you, about your construction background, and he's been asking to meet you ever since." We walked to Frank's room, where I found a man roughly my age sitting up in bed, looking remarkably healthy considering he'd suffered a major heart attack weeks earlier. His handshake was firm, his eyes alert, and his smile genuinely warm. "Robert Hammond, Marcus has told me so much about you. 40 years in construction, built your own company from nothing. That's impressive as hell." Frank's enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself relaxing into conversation about projects and techniques, challenges and solutions. We compared stories about difficult clients, impossible deadlines, the satisfaction of completing complex builds that others said couldn't be done. "Marcus says you lost your business during the recession," Frank said, with sympathy rather than judgment. "That must have been devastating after putting so much of yourself into building it." "It was the hardest period of my life," I admitted. "Not just financially, but emotionally. When you build something from scratch, watch it grow, provide jobs for people who become like family, losing it feels like losing part of yourself. But you didn't give up. Marcus says you're planning a comeback, specializing in medical facilities." I glanced at Marcus, surprised he'd shared details about our tentative business discussions. We've talked about it, still in the early planning stages. Frank's expression became serious. Can I give you some advice from someone who's been in construction longer than both of you have been alive? Of course. The medical construction field is about to explode. Baby boomers are aging, medical technology is advancing rapidly, and existing facilities are becoming obsolete. The companies that understand both construction and healthcare are going to make fortunes. He leaned forward, lowering his voice conspiratorially. My nephew works for a major hospital system's facilities management department. They're planning massive expansions over the next 5 years, but they're struggling to find contractors who really understand medical requirements. What kind of expansions? Outpatient surgery centers, imaging facilities, specialized treatment wings. Projects worth millions of dollars, but they need builders who can handle clean room specifications, equipment integration, regulatory compliance. Marcus had been listening intently to our conversation. That's exactly what we've been discussing, combining construction expertise with medical knowledge. Frank studied both of us carefully. You know what you two have that most construction companies don't? What's that? Trust. Marcus has credibility in the medical community, and you have credibility in the construction world. Put those together, and you've got something powerful. He reached for a business card on his bedside table. This is my nephew's contact information, David Morrison, Senior Director of Facilities Planning for Regional Health Systems. They oversee 8 hospitals and 14 outpatient facilities across 3 states. I took the card, reading David Morrison's impressive title and contact information. Tell him Frank referred you and explain your unique combination of medical and construction expertise. He's been complaining for months about contractors who bid low, then discover they don't understand medical requirements halfway through projects. The conversation continued for another hour, with Frank sharing insights about the industry that would have taken months of research to uncover independently. His 40 years of experience had given him connections and knowledge that could accelerate our business development significantly. More importantly, his enthusiasm for our concept was validating in ways I hadn't expected. Here was a successful professional who understood both construction and business, and he was telling us our idea had genuine potential. As we prepared to leave, Frank grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "Robert, can I tell you something personal?" "Of course. Watching you and Marcus together reminds me of my relationship with my own son. We went through some rough patches when he was younger, times when he was embarrassed by my blue-collar background, wanted to distance himself from what he saw as limitation. But life has a way of teaching people what really matters. My son learned that respect comes from character, not circumstances. That the people who stick with you through difficulties are the ones worth building a life with." Frank's words echoed the lessons Marcus had learned through his experience with Victoria, but hearing them from someone outside our family gave them additional weight. The fact that you two found your way back to each other, that you're planning to build something together, that tells me you both understand what's truly valuable. Driving home from the hospital, Marcus was unusually quiet, processing the significance of our encounter with Frank. "That wasn't a coincidence," he finally said as we stopped at a traffic light. "What do you mean?" "Frank asking to meet you, having a nephew in hospital facilities management, being so enthusiastic about our business concept, that was the universe giving us exactly what we needed when we needed it." I'd been thinking the same thing, but hadn't wanted to voice such mystical interpretations of practical events. Sometimes, preparation meets opportunity in unexpected ways. "Dad, I think we need to take this seriously, not just as a someday possibility, but as an immediate opportunity." "Marcus, you're only 2 months into residency. This is hardly the time to start a business." "I'm not talking about starting immediately. I'm talking about beginning the preparation process now, so we're ready when the timing is right." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through calendar applications. "I want to set up a meeting with David Morrison within the next 2 weeks. Even if we're not ready to bid on projects yet, we need to understand what opportunities are available." The determination in his voice reminded me of his approach to medical school applications years earlier. When Marcus decided to pursue something seriously, he became focused with laser intensity. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Research phase first. I'll use my access to medical professionals to understand facility requirements, compliance issues, emerging technologies. You research the construction side, specialized contractors, equipment suppliers, certification processes. Marcus was already thinking like a business owner, breaking complex challenges into manageable components. Then we develop a comprehensive business plan, complete with financial projections, startup costs, competitive analysis. When I finish residency in 2 years, we'll be ready to launch properly. 2 years is a long time to maintain enthusiasm for a concept. Not when the concept could change both our lives. Frank was right about the market opportunity. Medical construction is going to explode, and we could position ourselves at the front of that wave. I found myself caught up in his excitement despite my natural caution. After years of financial struggle and professional disappointment, the idea of building something meaningful again was intoxicating. "There's something else to consider," Marcus continued. "Your current job situation. You're working as a night janitor at 62 years old, making barely enough to cover basic expenses. This business could provide real financial security." He was right, though I'd avoided thinking about my long-term employment prospects. Physical labor became more difficult each year, and janitorial work offered no advancement opportunities or retirement benefits. "I'm not getting any younger," I admitted. "Starting over at my age is risky." "Staying where you are is riskier. What happens if you get injured and can't do physical work anymore? What happens when the college decides they don't need overnight custodial services?" Marcus had identified fears I'd been suppressing for months. My financial situation was stable but precarious, dependent on my ability to continue doing work that was becoming increasingly difficult. Hammond Medical Construction could provide the security and dignity you deserve, work that uses your expertise instead of just your physical labor. The name he'd chosen for our hypothetical business still gave me emotional chills. After losing Hammond Construction, I'd never imagined seeing the family name associated with business success again. "You really think we could make this work?" "I think we'd be crazy not to try. We have complementary expertise, we have a market opportunity, and most importantly, we have trust in each other." That last point was crucial. Business partnerships failed more often from personal conflicts than from market conditions. Marcus and I had worked through our relationship challenges and emerged with deeper understanding and mutual respect. "All right," I said, surprising myself with the decisiveness in my voice. "Let's set up that meeting with David Morrison." Marcus's grin could have powered the entire hospital. "Really? You're serious about this?" "I'm serious about exploring it thoroughly. No commitments until we understand all the variables, but yes, let's investigate the opportunity properly." The next 2 weeks flew by in a blur of research and preparation. Marcus used his medical connections to gather information about facility planning, regulatory requirements, and emerging technologies. I contacted former suppliers and subcontractors to understand pricing for specialized construction services. We met every evening after Marcus's hospital shifts, comparing notes and developing questions for our upcoming meeting with David Morrison. The depth of information we uncovered was both encouraging and overwhelming. The medical construction market was indeed experiencing rapid growth, driven by aging demographics and advancing technology. However, the regulatory complexity was significant, requiring specialized knowledge that traditional construction companies often lacked. "This is exactly why we have an advantage," Marcus observed during one of our evening sessions. "Most construction companies try to learn medical requirements after they get contracts. We'd understand medical needs before we even submit bids." David Morrison agreed to meet us at Regional Health System's corporate headquarters, a modern glass building that projected exactly the kind of success we hoped to achieve. Marcus had taken a personal day from the hospital, and I'd requested time off from my custodial duties. We dressed carefully for the meeting, Marcus in his best suit and me in the only professional outfit I still owned from my business owning days. Looking at ourselves in the mirror before leaving, we looked like father and son business partners, rather than doctor and janitor. Regional Health Systems offices were impressive, filled with architectural models of current and planned facilities. David Morrison greeted us in a conference room overlooking the city, where hospital buildings dotted the landscape like monuments to medical progress. "Uncle Frank speaks very highly of both of you," David began, settling into his chair with coffee and a thick folder of documents. "He says you're considering medical construction specialization." "We're exploring the possibility," I replied carefully. "Marcus has medical expertise, and I have construction experience. We're trying to understand whether combining those backgrounds could create viable business opportunities." David smiled. "Based on our current challenges, I'd say you're exploring exactly the right opportunity at exactly the right time." He opened his folder, revealing charts and project timelines that represented millions of dollars in planned construction. Regional Health Systems is planning approximately $60 million in facility expansions over the next 3 years. New outpatient surgery centers, upgraded imaging facilities, specialized treatment wings for cardiac care and oncology. The numbers were staggering, far beyond anything I'd imagined when we first discussed this possibility. The problem we're facing is finding contractors who understand medical construction requirements well enough to bid accurately and complete projects with costly delays. Marcus leaned forward. "What kind of problems are you encountering?" "Everything from basic issues like improper ventilation systems in clean rooms to complex problems like equipment integration failures that require complete reconstruction. Last year, we had a contractor install flooring that couldn't handle the weight of an MRI machine. The entire project had to be redone." David pulled out photographs showing construction disasters that had cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to correct. "Most general contractors assume medical facilities are just buildings with medical equipment. They don't understand that everything from electrical systems to wall materials must meet specific healthcare standards." "What about specialized medical construction companies?" I asked.
They exist, but they're expensive and often booked years in advance. We need more options, preferably companies that combine construction expertise with genuine medical knowledge. The conversation continued for over 2 hours, with David describing specific projects, timelines, and requirements. By the meeting's end, we had a comprehensive understanding of the market opportunity and the challenges we need to overcome. "I'd like to stay in touch as you develop your business concept," David concluded, handing us his business card. "When you're ready to submit qualifications for projects, Regional Health Systems would definitely consider your proposals." Walking back to our car, Marcus and I were both quiet, processing the magnitude of what we'd learned. $60 million in 3 years, Marcus finally said, breaking the silence. "Just from one hospital system. There are dozens of similar organizations across the region. Dad, this could be bigger than either of us imagined." I started the car, my hands trembling slightly with excitement and nervousness. "It could also be more complex than we're prepared to handle. That's why we have 2 years to prepare properly. By the time I finish residency, we could be ready to compete for major contracts." The drive home was filled with planning discussions that felt both ambitious and achievable. We'd moved from vague business concepts to specific market intelligence in just 2 weeks. That evening, I called Harold Thompson, my lawyer friend who'd helped me through the business bankruptcy years earlier. If we were serious about Hammond Medical Construction, we'd need proper legal structure and professional guidance. "Robert, it's wonderful to hear from you," Harold said warmly. "How are things going with Marcus? Last time we talked, you were concerned about your relationship. Actually, that's part of why I'm calling. Marcus and I have reconciled, and we're considering starting a business together." I explained our medical construction concept, the market research we'd conducted, and the meeting with David Morrison. Harold listened without interruption, occasionally asking clarifying questions about technical details. "This sounds promising," he said when I finished. "Medical construction is definitely a growth market, and your combination of expertise could be valuable. What kind of legal structure would we need?" "Probably a limited liability company, at least initially. That would provide protection for both of you while maintaining flexibility for growth and investment opportunities." Harold agreed to meet with us the following week to discuss business formation, contracts, and regulatory requirements. Having professional legal guidance would ensure we avoided the mistakes that had contributed to my previous business failure. Over the next month, our evening meetings evolved from casual discussions to formal business planning sessions.
Marcus created detailed spreadsheets projecting startup costs, revenue potential, and growth timelines. I developed comprehensive lists of required certifications, equipment needs, and staffing considerations. The deeper we dove into the planning process, the more convinced I became that this opportunity was real and achievable. We weren't chasing an impossible dream. We were methodically preparing to enter a legitimate market with genuine demand for our specific expertise. Marcus's residency work was providing invaluable insights into medical facility operations. He observed how doctors and nurses interacted with their physical environment, identifying design flaws and inefficiencies that better planning could prevent. Yesterday, I watched a surgical team struggle with an equipment setup that could have been avoided with better room design, he told me during one of our planning sessions. The electrical outlets were positioned poorly, forcing them to run extension cords across walkways. That's exactly the kind of problem we could solve with upfront planning. More than solve, we could prevent. Most construction companies build medical facilities like any other commercial space, then try to retrofit them for medical use. We designed for medical use from the beginning. Marcus was developing an eye for practical applications that would make him invaluable in client consultations. He could speak the language of medical professionals while understanding construction realities. Meanwhile, my research into specialized construction techniques was revealing opportunities I'd never considered during my original construction career. Medical facilities required expertise in cleanroom construction, electromagnetic shielding, vibration control, and dozens of other specialized areas. The learning curve is steep, I admitted during one particularly intense planning session. We'd need significant training and certification before we could compete for major projects. That's what the next 2 years are for. By the time I finish residency, you could be certified in every relevant specialty. Marcus's confidence in my ability to master new technical skills was both flattering and motivating. At 62, returning to school felt daunting, but the alternative was remaining in dead-end employment until I was too old to work at all. 3 months after our first meeting with David Morrison, we received an unexpected phone call that changed everything. The call came from David Morrison on a Wednesday evening while Marcus and I were reviewing certification requirements for medical construction contractors. My phone rang just as we'd finished calculating the costs for specialized training programs, and David's voice carried an urgency I hadn't heard during our previous conversations. "Robert, I need to ask you a significant favor. We have an emergency situation that could become a major opportunity for your future business." I put the phone on speaker so Marcus could listen. "What kind of emergency?" "Our primary contractor for the new cardiac surgery center just declared bankruptcy. They're 3 weeks into a 12-week project, and we're facing massive delays if we can't find immediate replacement." Marcus and I exchanged glances across the kitchen table. This was exactly the kind of disaster David had warned us about during our initial meeting. The project involves specialized cleanroom construction, equipment mounting systems, and electromagnetic shielding for sensitive cardiac monitoring equipment. Most contractors won't touch it because of the liability and complexity. "David, we appreciate you thinking of us, but we're not ready for a project of that magnitude. We don't even have our business license yet." "I understand, but hear me out. What if we structured this as a consulting arrangement? You'd work with our emergency replacement contractor, providing medical expertise and construction oversight. Think of it as paid training for exactly the kind of work you want to specialize in." The proposal was intriguing but terrifying. We'd been planning for months of preparation before taking on any actual projects. What kind of timeline are we talking about? "The replacement contractor starts Monday. They're competent builders, but they have zero medical facility experience. They need someone who understands both construction and medical requirements to guide them through the complexities." Marcus leaned toward the phone. "David, this is Marcus. What would our specific responsibilities be?" "Quality control, compliance verification, liaison between the construction team and medical staff. Basically, you'd ensure that what gets built actually works for cardiac surgery rather than just meeting building codes." The opportunity was enormous, but so were the risks. Failure on a high-profile project could destroy our reputation before we'd even officially launched our business. "Can we have 24 hours to discuss this and get back to you?" "Of course. But Robert, I need you to understand something important. Regional Health Systems is watching this project very carefully. Success here could lead to preferred contractor status for our entire expansion program. After David hung up, Marcus and I sat in silence, both understanding the magnitude of what had just been offered to us. This could be exactly what we need to prove ourselves, Marcus finally said. Or it could be the disaster that ends our business before it starts. Dad, think about what we've learned over the past 3 months.
You've researched every aspect of medical construction. I've observed cardiac surgery facilities' operation daily. We know more about this than most contractors who've been doing it for years. Marcus was right about our preparation, but knowledge and experience weren't the same thing. There's a difference between understanding requirements and managing a complex construction project, which is why David structured it as consulting rather than general contracting. We wouldn't be responsible for the actual construction, just for ensuring it meets medical standards. I walked to the window, looking out at the neighborhood where I'd been living since losing my house. The modest apartment complex housed people like me, folks who'd experienced financial setbacks and rebuilding their lives one careful step at a time. What if we fail? What if something goes wrong and we're blamed for delays or cost overruns? Marcus joined me at the window. What if we succeed? What if this becomes the foundation for everything we've been planning? The next morning, I called Harold Thompson to discuss the legal implications of David's proposal. If we were going to accept this opportunity, we needed proper protection and documentation. "It's an interesting proposition," Harold said after I explained the situation. "Consulting arrangements provide more protection than contracting, but you'd still need comprehensive liability insurance and clear scope definitions. Can that be arranged quickly? Professional liability insurance can be expedited for consultants. The key is making sure your responsibilities are clearly defined and limited to advisory functions rather than direct construction management." Harold agreed to draft consulting agreements that would protect us while allowing participation in the project. "If you're serious about this, Robert, I can have contracts ready by Friday." We're serious. Nervous, but serious. That evening, Marcus and I made our decision. We would accept David's offer, but with careful legal protections and clearly defined responsibilities. This would be our trial by fire, our opportunity to prove that Hammond Medical Construction could deliver value to clients. The following Monday, I found myself walking through a partially constructed cardiac surgery center wearing a hard hat for the first time in 3 years. The familiar sounds of construction work, hammering and drilling and shouted instructions, brought back memories of the career I thought was finished forever. The replacement contractor, Morrison Building Systems, had assembled a competent crew, but their foreman, Jim Peterson, looked overwhelmed by the project's complexity. "I've built everything from shopping malls to office towers," Jim confided during our introductory meeting. "But this medical stuff has requirements I've never seen before. The specifications are like reading a foreign language." Marcus had taken personal time from his residency to participate in the project launch. Watching him review architectural plans with Jim, explaining medical equipment requirements and patient flow considerations, I felt pride that had nothing to do with business success. "The cardiac monitoring systems are extremely sensitive to electromagnetic interference," Marcus explained, pointing to specific areas on the blueprints. "These walls need specialized shielding that most contractors don't understand." Jim nodded, making notes on his copy of the plans. "The previous contractor had ordered standard electrical systems. You're saying that won't work?" "Not for cardiac surgery. The equipment we use can detect electrical activity in a patient's heart that's measured in millivolts. Any electromagnetic interference can make the difference between successful surgery and catastrophic failure." The complexity of medical construction was becoming real in ways our theoretical planning hadn't captured. Every decision had life or death implications that went far beyond typical building requirements. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus and I developed a routine that balanced his residency responsibilities with our consulting duties. He would visit the construction site during his breaks, reviewing progress and answering technical questions. I spent full days on site, coordinating between the construction crew and hospital staff. The learning curve was steep, but our combination of medical knowledge and construction experience proved invaluable. We caught potential problems before they became expensive mistakes, suggested improvements that enhanced functionality, and served as translators between two professions that rarely understood each other. "You guys are lifesavers," Jim told me during the third week of the project. "Without your input, we would have made at least 6 major errors that would have required complete reconstruction." The validation felt incredible after years of feeling professionally worthless. My expertise was valuable again, contributing to something meaningful and important. More significantly, word of our success was spreading throughout regional health systems. David Morrison made daily visits to the construction site, observing our process and taking notes for future projects. "I'm impressed with how smoothly this is progressing," he told me during one of his visits. "The previous contractor was 3 weeks behind schedule when they declared bankruptcy. You've got us back on track and under budget." Marcus deserves most of the credit. His medical insights prevented problems we never would have anticipated. That's exactly why your business concept is so valuable. Traditional contractors learn medical requirements through expensive mistakes. You prevent the mistakes from happening in the first place. 2 days before the project's completion, Marcus and I received news that changed everything. David called us into his office with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Regional Health Systems Board of Directors met yesterday to review the cardiac surgery center," he began, settling behind his desk with a thick folder. My stomach clenched, wondering if something had gone wrong that we weren't aware of. "They were so impressed with the results that they've asked me to offer you an exclusive contract for our entire expansion program." Marcus and I looked at each other in disbelief. Exclusive contract? Preferred contractor status for all medical construction projects over the next 3 years? Guaranteed minimum revenue of $2 million annually with potential for much higher earnings as our expansion accelerates. The numbers were staggering, far beyond our most optimistic projections. "David, we appreciate the confidence, but we're still not officially incorporated. Marcus hasn't even finished his residency, which is why we're structuring this as a development partnership. Hammond Medical Construction would have 18 months to complete certification requirements and staff development. During that period, you'd continue consulting on projects while building your capabilities." David opened the folder, revealing a comprehensive partnership proposal that Regional Health Systems' legal team had prepared. "We want to invest in your success because your success benefits our patients. Better medical facilities save lives, and you've proven you can deliver better facilities." The meeting lasted 3 hours, with David explaining contract terms, growth projections, and partnership benefits that exceeded our wildest dreams. By the time we left his office, Hammond Medical Construction had transformed from hopeful concept to guaranteed reality. Driving home from that meeting, Marcus was unusually quiet, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. $2 million annually? He finally said, breaking the silence. Minimum. David mentioned potential for much higher earnings. "Dad, do you realize what this means? In 18 months, you'll go from working as a night janitor to running a multi-million-dollar construction company." The transformation does seem almost too dramatic to believe. 3 years earlier, I'd lost everything and thought my professional life was finished. Now I was being offered the opportunity to build something larger and more successful than anything I'd achieved before. "It means we both succeeded in rebuilding what Victoria tried to destroy," I said, remembering the woman who'd convinced Marcus that his father was an embarrassment. She wanted Marcus to be ashamed of family that didn't meet her standards. Instead, that family is about to become more successful than she ever imagined possible. Marcus smiled.
The irony is perfect. Her betrayal taught me to value character over status, and that lesson led directly to our business success. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us create opportunities for the best things to follow. That evening, we called Harold Thompson to review the partnership proposal and begin formal business incorporation. Hammond Medical Construction would become a legal entity within 30 days, with Marcus and me as equal partners. "This is remarkable," Harold said after reviewing the contract terms. "Regional Health Systems is essentially guaranteeing your business success while providing the resources you need to achieve it." "It feels too good to true," I admitted. "Good business partnerships benefit everyone involved. Regional Health Systems gets reliable contractors who understand medical requirements. You get steady revenue and growth opportunities. It's a perfect match." Over the next month, we worked with Harold to establish Hammond Medical Construction as a legitimate business entity. Marcus arranged to reduce his residency hours to part-time status, allowing more involvement in our business development. The Cardiac Surgery Center project concluded ahead of schedule and under budget, earning praise from hospital administrators and medical staff. Dr. Elizabeth Warren, the chief of cardiac surgery, personally thanked us for creating a facility that enhanced patient care capabilities. The design improvements you suggested have already improved our surgical outcomes, she told us during the facility's dedication ceremony. Better sightlines, improved equipment positioning, enhanced air filtration systems. Every detail contributes to better patient care. Standing in that completed cardiac surgery center, watching medical professionals prepare to save lives in spaces we'd helped create, I felt a satisfaction that went far beyond financial success. This was meaningful work that contributed something valuable to the world. 6 months later, Hammond Medical Construction had completed consulting projects for 4 additional medical facilities and hired 3 full-time employees. Our reputation for combining medical knowledge with construction expertise had spread throughout the healthcare community. Marcus had transitioned to part-time residency status, allowing him to focus more attention on business development while maintaining his medical credentials. His ability to communicate with doctors and hospital administrators in their own language made him invaluable in client relationships. More importantly, our business success had strengthened our personal relationship in ways I hadn't anticipated. Working together daily, solving problems, and celebrating achievements had created bonds that went beyond typical father-son relationships. We were partners in the truest sense, each contributing unique expertise to shared goals. The most satisfying moment came during a chance encounter at the Regional Medical Conference, where Marcus was presenting research on optimal surgical facility design. Walking through the convention center between presentations, we encountered Victoria for the first time since her dramatic exit from Marcus's life. She looked older, more tired, lacking the confident arrogance I remembered from our previous meetings. Her father's legal troubles had clearly taken their toll, and her attempt to rebuild her social status had apparently not succeeded. "Marcus?" she approached hesitantly, uncertain whether he would acknowledge her presence. "Victoria." His tone was polite but distant, treating her like an acquaintance rather than someone who'd once been central to his life. "I heard about your business success. Congratulations. You always were ambitious." "Thank you." Marcus showed no inclination to extend the conversation. Victoria glanced at me, probably remembering her previous assessment of my value as a human being. "Mr. Hammond, you look well." "I'm doing very well, thank you." The awkwardness was palpable as Victoria struggled to find common ground with people she'd dismissed as beneath her notice. "I've been meaning to reach out, to apologize for how things ended between us." Marcus studied her for a moment before responding. "Victoria, I appreciate the thought, but apologies aren't necessary. Your decision to leave taught me important lessons about what I value in relationships. I made mistakes. My father's legal troubles have given me perspective on what really matters. I hope you find happiness and success," Marcus said with genuine politeness, "but our lives have moved in different directions now." Victoria nodded, understanding that no reconciliation was possible or desired. "I'm glad things worked out well for you both." After she walked away, Marcus and I continued toward his presentation, neither of us feeling the need to discuss the encounter. Victoria belonged to a different chapter of our lives, one we'd moved beyond completely. "How does it feel to see her again?" I asked as we approached the conference room where Marcus would be speaking. "Like seeing a stranger who happened to play a role in my education," he replied. "Her betrayal taught me valuable lessons, but she's not part of my future." Marcus's presentation on surgical facility design drew an audience of over 200 medical professionals, hospital administrators, and construction industry representatives. Watching him speak confidently about topics that combined his medical training with our business expertise, I felt the same pride I'd experienced at his medical school graduation. But this pride was different, deeper, because it represented not just his individual achievement, but our shared success in building something meaningful together. After the presentation, we were approached by representatives from 3 major hospital systems interested in discussing construction partnerships. Hammond Medical Construction's reputation was spreading beyond our regional market, creating opportunities we'd never imagined during those early planning sessions in Marcus's apartment. "Dad," Marcus said as we walked back to our hotel that evening, "do you remember what Victoria said about successful people not associating with failures?" I remember. She was right about one thing. Successful people don't associate with failures, but she was wrong about who the failures were. Looking back on the journey that had brought us to this point, I understood that Marcus's painful experience with Victoria had been necessary for both our personal growth and our business success. Her betrayal had taught him to value character over status, loyalty over ambition, substance over appearances. Those lessons had made him a better doctor, a better business partner, and a better man. For me, losing my original construction business had been devastating, but it had also created the circumstances that led to our medical construction partnership. Sometimes apparent failures are actually redirections toward opportunities we never would have discovered otherwise. Hammond Medical Construction continued growing beyond our original projections. Within 2 years, we had 15 employees, partnerships with 8 hospital systems, and annual revenue approaching $5 million. Marcus completed his residency while maintaining active involvement in our business operations. More importantly, we had rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect and shared purpose. The father and son who had nearly lost each other due to shame and misunderstanding had become business partners whose success was built on the very values Victoria had tried to convince Marcus to abandon. Standing in our new office building 3 years after that painful confrontation in his apartment hallway, watching our employees coordinate projects that would improve healthcare for thousands of patients, I reflected on the unexpected ways life had rewarded our commitment to family loyalty and authentic values. Marcus had learned that the people who love you unconditionally are worth more than those who value you conditionally. I had learned that professional failure doesn't define personal worth, and that new opportunities can emerge from the ashes of old disappointments. Hammond Medical Construction had become more than a business success story. It was proof that character matters more than circumstances, that family bonds can survive misunderstanding, and that the best revenge against those who underestimate you is simply becoming the best version of yourself. Victoria had called me a loser, and Marcus had repeated that assessment to his friends. But winners and losers aren't determined by temporary circumstances or material possessions. They're determined by how you respond to challenges, how you treat the people who love you, and what you build with the time you're given. By those measures, Marcus and I had both won more than we'd lost. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.